Welcome to Trying Days, Roundtable 17. For our children's sake, we can build the economics of peace. Let's get started now. Featuring Paul Fitzgerald, Elizabeth Gould, our host, Kris Millegan, and special guest, Alana Hartsock. I am Bruce DeTorres, moderating. Paul and Liz are husband and wife co-authors of Invisible History, Afghanistan's Untold Story, Crossing Zero, the AfPak War at the Turning Point of American Empire, The Valediction, Three Knights of Desmond, and The Valediction Resurrection, and many other articles and pieces and commentary over decades studying the world's development politically, geopolitically, empirically, and many other ways. Check out their work at valediction.net. And Alana Hartsock is an educator, activist, and lecturer in the areas of economic justice, land rights, and commons rent public finance. Her book, The Earth Belongs to Everyone, received the Radical Middle Book Award, and a free PDF of it is available at the International Union for Land Value Taxation at their site, which is theiu.org. That's theiu.org. And the title again was The Earth Belongs to Everyone, under resources or books on the top part. Alana Hartsock. Alana was a candidate for Congress twice, for the Green Party in 2001 and the Democratic Party in 2014. And Alana initiated a tax reform bill for the state of Pennsylvania that passed nearly unanimously. Paul and Liz are going to set the table for our roundtable today. But first, our host, the publisher of Trying Day books, about 160 books in the last 20 years that the mainstream ignores, and you can hear him interviewing many of his authors at tryingday.com. Find the podcast, about 120 episodes, and irreplaceable curriculum of things behind the scenes the mainstream would rather not us know about. Our host, Kris Millegan.
Well, thank you, Bruce. And I'm very happy and honored to host these roundtables. And, you know, it's for discussion, okay? Because when people discuss things, people learn, because some people might think one thing and some people might think another thing. And you have to talk about it to figure out what is actual real. And, you know, well, this whole thing started with books. And I'm going to recommend people to read books, okay? Paul and Liz came at me with their valediction. I read it and looked at it and said, there's more than just this book here. You know, Paul and Liz have an amazing story, okay? Especially Paul, okay? Because of the Fitzgeralds and, you know, the American Indians and other indigenous people talk about DNA, memory DNA that is encased within ourselves, that includes our parents, our grandparents, and all this other thing, and it includes history, okay? And, you know, this world, it lives by, you know, people that are running around and doing things. Some people doing things that we want them to do, some people doing other things. But you had two tribes in the woods, you know, they finally, you know, they meet each other, and, you know, they have to figure out, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to get along, or are we just going to kill all these guys? You know, what are we going to do? So there's good reasons to talk about things and figure it out. And I had a gentleman come at me with a book called Counting Bounty, okay, which told the story of Henry George. I was reading and I says, now, who is this guy? Who is this Henry George? You know, and then you look into it and you find out that Mark Twain got a little bit more popular than him, but he was the next guy up with Mark Twain in the late 1800s. Why didn't we get taught about him in school? You know, there's something going on here. So again, I strongly recommend people reading books, okay? Read Paul and Liz Valediction, read Valediction, The Resurrection, because it's all part and parcel of what is going on. And We want to create a better world for our children. And so let's do it.
Paul and Liz?
We are delighted to be here to start this process, and we're very excited about the continuing development of our communication to get the message out to the world, and the letter that's being worked on now to inaugurate this process. But before we actually get to the letter, we want to present a summary from the Valediction Resurrection, laying out the history of the Fitzgerald legacy entwined with the English and British crown that brings us into the current era. This background will deepen your understanding of the multidimensional layers going into the letter that is empowered when we become conscious of its significance. And now Paul will present from the Jerusalem Crusade to the Holy Grail to the death of JFK.
On Friday, October 13, 1307, French King Philip IV ordered the powerful Catholic military order known as the Knights Templar arrested and charged with heretical practices. And a month later, on November 22nd, under pressure from Philip, Pope Clement V issued the papal bull Pastoralis Praeeminentiae, instructing all the monarchs of Europe to seize the Templars' extensive assets. Deeply in debt to the Templars for their military service in his war against England, it has long been suspected that the charges against them derive more from the king's depleted treasury than actual acts of heresy. But following an extensive inquisition and trial, including torture, the Templars and their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, were found guilty, and on March 18, 1314, were burnt at the stake outside the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris. Whether or not the Knights Templar maintained heretical beliefs, the immolation of Templar Grand Master Jacques de Molay at the hands of the Pope's inquisitors would serve as an inspiration for generations to seek revenge on the Roman Church. And so begins the legend that winds its way from Jerusalem to Paris to the Holy Grail to Rosslyn Chapel and Scottish Rite Freemasonry, and from there to the death of JFK. Pope Innocent III's brutal Albigensian Crusade, 1209 to 1229, against the powerful dualist Cathar movement, pitted northern France's Catholic nobility against the lesser nobility of the South, who were tolerant and supportive of it. As a pre-Christian faith deeply rooted in the pagan world and spread by Rome's legions through Mithraism to the four corners of the Roman Empire, Catharism represented an old and powerful expression of Gnostic belief, which refused to be suppressed by the sterile and often contradictory doctrines of Rome's Christianized empire. As described by Reverend V.A. Demott, canon of London's St. Paul's Cathedral, in a preface to a 1947 book on the subject titled The Arrow and the Sword, quote, "To mention only its roots in Mithraism, its links with the Gnostics, its theological dualism, its asceticism, the ritual of life and death as cosmic mysteries, the appeal of the troubadours, Arthurian legends, and the cult of the Holy Grail, the passions aroused for and against witchcraft, the intimate connection between sex and religion. All these things are sufficient testimony to the deeply rooted vitality of a stream of religious consciousness which cannot be superciliously dismissed by rationalists and moralists." Writing on the heels of World War II, and with Europe still in ruins from the rise of an irrational and immoral pagan faith called Nazism, Demott feared that such a vital apocalyptic belief system, with its robust righteousness and commitment to a struggle against an evil material world, was bound to rise again, as it had so many times in the past. Yet he might not have been surprised to know that his own Protestant faith, of which he was a senior officer as the canon of St. Paul's, had its own roots in the same heresy. Much has been speculated about the revival of Catharism and the survival of the Templars following their dissolution in 1312. Today's popular fiction about their role as guardians of the Holy Grail rests not on any particular historical accounting, but mainly on 18th century Masonic myth-making and Sir Walter Scott's early 19th century stories that romanticize the Templar knighthood. A deeply researched 2017 book by British Ambassador Craig Murray about the First Anglo-Afghan War Alexander Burns, master of the great game, not only connects Afghanistan to the Grail legend, but maintains that the legendary Alexander Burns and his brother James are the source of the Templar connection to Scottish Freemasonry, and that, not surprisingly, they invented it. The men of the Enlightenment found great interest in the mystical illumination through Masonic rituals. To these men, the newly industrializing West needed a new prophetic tradition to anchor it in history. Rediscovery of the ancient world as a result of imperial interventions into Asia and Egypt spawned a renewed interest in Renaissance Neoplatonism and Hermetic Kabbalism, and their roots in a life-denying Gnostic creed. In fact, the very act of returning in victory to the origin of these Gnostic beliefs was in itself proof that they had been chosen to fulfill a cosmic cycle, as prophesied by the ancients. Bestowing the Templars with occult mystical powers fit neatly into the early Romantic movement and helped to promote Enlightenment thinking as part of God's plan for mankind. As a military order of religious warriors responsible only to the Pope, the Templars and their Cathar backers in France and England represented a powerful autonomous deep state within a medieval society. In many ways, Orthodox Christianity was no match for the life-denying dualist doctrine of the Cathars. Catharism's simple focus on the cosmic battle between a spiritual good and a material evil, and its promise of a time-ending apocalypse in which the material world would be consumed in fire, was an extreme seduction. Driven to ground by a corrupted Roman Catholic Church and a greedy French king, the heresy appeared to have been trampled out by the middle of the 14th century. But the onset of the Reformation 2 centuries later, Rome's authority faced a new challenge. And as it spread to Ireland, the old Catholic Anglo-Norman warlords like the Fitzgeralds would be drawn into a struggle for their existence. To Rome, the Protestant Reformation represented a heresy that was at once secular and religious. Martin Luther and John Calvin confronted a papacy that claimed an earthly kingdom as well as a spiritual one. In 1534, the English Parliament's Act of Supremacy answered that claim by declaring Henry VIII supreme head of the earth of the Church of England. And in 1559, his daughter, Queen Elizabeth I, became the church's supreme governor. Cathar territory remained fertile ground for insurrection against the church. The French Calvinist Huguenot movement of the late 16th century grew from exactly the same ground in France, where 300 years earlier, the Cathars had been brutally suppressed by the papal crusade. In England, Queen Elizabeth I's deep state, comprised of the Earl of Leicester, Sir Francis Walsingham, and Sir Philip Sidney, found common cause with the Huguenots and supported them with soldiers, guns, and money. Their armies waged holy war against the papacy across Europe and in Catholic Ireland, where they targeted the last visible threats to Elizabeth's authority, with the Fitzgeralds a prime target. The Irish Fitzgeralds had drawn their original power from France and Italy in the 11th century as castellans and enforcers for the Cathar-friendly French royals under William the Conqueror and Henry II. They had performed their duties well enough to be rewarded with lands and titles. But when they came to Ireland in 1169, their paths diverged. Gerald of Wales, a prelate and member of the Fitzgerald clan, makes clear in his 12th century account of the Irish invasion, the Expugnatio Hibernica, that by 1170, his family was fed up with royal excess and willing to strike out under their own banner. And after 3 centuries of immersion in Irish culture, they had become transformed. Forsaking the English language, English customs, and English law, the Catholic Anglo-Normans had become Irish. But the coming of the Protestant Reformation put them in direct opposition to the British Crown. Known as the Old English and more recently as the Twilight Lords, their ongoing intermarriage with Irish clans placed them between 2 worlds. Known for their willingness to renounce their loyalty to England, the Fitzgeralds were feared and hated by London as representatives of a Roman Catholic deep state bent on reversing the Reformation. On the other hand, the Sidney Circle represented a very old deep state of its own, that stream of Gnostic religious consciousness that had been suppressed for centuries, had risen in rebellion and was committed to ridding the world of evil. The Sydney Circle and its primary operatives, Francis Walsingham, Edmund Spencer, Sir Walter Raleigh, and John Dee, represented the militarized edge of Renaissance Neoplatonism, bent on establishing England not just as a global empire to rival Catholic Spain, but as a spiritual empire headed by Queen Elizabeth I that would cleanse the material world and restore a lost spiritual destiny. Inspired by the Hermetic Kabbalist Neoplatonism of John Dee, the Sydney Circle would take on the Fitzgerald, Earl of Desmond, in a genocidal war of extermination. Unknown to most people today, the feud between the European deep state factions of the Counter-Reformation was a life and death struggle that embodied no less than the core principles of a cosmic war between light and dark. In 1580, the prospect of this apocalypse coming to Ireland was so serious, it prompted the Holy See in Rome to send an army of Italians and Spaniards to help the Fitzgeralds under the authority drafted by the Just War Doctrine. As described by Richard Burleth, author of The Twilight Lords, Elizabeth I, and the First Irish Holocaust, the Fitzgerald struggle against Renaissance Neoplatonism offers a window into a 1,000-year-old factional struggle of a European deep state rooted in a Gnostic belief system, with the Fitzgerald family providing the required Manichaean evil of the day, and Elizabeth I and her Red Cross Templar Knights, the Christian purity in the tradition of King Arthur and the Round Table. It is of no small importance that the assassination of Gerald Fitzgerald, the last Earl of Desmond in 1583, marked the beginning of the British Empire. The eternal struggle of good against evil, the ancient Iranian war of light against dark by design, required a victory over the darkness, and the Earl of Desmond filled that sacred role. As was the custom at the time, his decapitated head was sent to London, where legend has it Queen Elizabeth sat with it for the morning before having it impaled on London Bridge. With the incorporation of the private-public partnership known as the British East India Company in 1600, Elizabeth's victory would be spread around the world. Elizabeth's favorite courtier, Walter Raleigh, would sail to America and establish the colony that came to be named Virginia for the Queen of the Virgin Queen. The East India Company would establish trading posts from India to America and create such economic oppression, it would trigger the American Revolution. Despite its loss of American colonies, the company would make its founding families rich beyond dreams of avarice and make the English language universal, and English culture the standard by which all other cultures would be judged. But the competition with Rome and the suspicion over its motives would never stop. In the 400+ years since Elizabeth I's time, much of what was once deemed heretical by church authorities has become commonplace. The feudal society that the Irish Twilight Lords died to preserve was already obsolete by Elizabethan times and would have vanished with or without them. The empire created by Elizabeth's courtiers ruled much of the earth for 4 centuries and was passed on to the United States for a brief reprise before losing its purpose. But the eternal struggle of good against evil, the war of light against dark, continues. And whether real or imagined, the revenge for the Templars' sacrifice lingers on, periodically revealing itself through correspondences and coincidences that can't be denied. On November 22, 1963, Americans were shocked by the public execution of their president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. In the years since, every manner of conspiracy theory has been advanced to explain what happened. But killing the first Roman Catholic president of the United States on the site of the first Masonic temple in Dallas on the anniversary of the papal destruction of the Knights Templar on November 22, 1307, bespeaks a ritual of revenge and retribution fulfilled. And if it was a ritual of revenge and retribution, based on a story fabricated by Alexander Burns and his brother James, seeking fame and fortune, then what it means to us today poses a deeply philosophical question that must be answered. The legacy of fighting a Manichaean enemy is writ large across history. If we dare to read the signs, the ancient cycle of revenge and retribution has brought us to the end of the line. For when you've defined everyone as an enemy and there's no one left to blame, when you look into the mirror, there will only be one choice, and that is self-annihilation.
Before moving on, I have a short story that I want to tell you about the source of the final statement just presented to you. We were interviewed in 2005 for a documentary titled Our Own Private Bin Laden. When I first saw Paul's response to the interview's question ending with self-annihilation, I was stunned. I knew instantly it was more than just the implication of the word itself. It was the depth of the look on his face that expressed a visceral and intellectual knowing I had never seen before in anyone. It made me realize that Paul was drawing from a source of self-knowledge that had to go back to the origin of the Fitzgerald legacy. Those words and that look were never forgotten and became the inspiration for the final statement. And it is special to be able to not only tell you the story, but show you the clip from the documentary itself of Paul saying those words.
Once you start defining everyone as an enemy, you don't stop until you look in the mirror and define yourself as that enemy. And then there's only one choice that you have when you've done that, and that's self-annihilation.
I still shudder at the depth of the feeling that look, speaks to me. And I really felt that, in all our effort to try to come to some kind of understanding about what this Fitzgerald legacy was, that was one of the first signs that I had about the depths of it. So I wanted to share that. We wanted to share that with you.
We did a book. It's the first novel written in Oregon. It's called Bridge of the Gods. And it's basically the story of this Puritan who lands on the East Coast of the United States with his family. And he has a dream about this bridge and this mountain out in the West. And in this dream, he's a preacher, by the way, and he's told that his job is to go tell the Indians to stop the blood feud, to stop killing each other, disease and stuff. Well, his wife and child died. So he was thinking, well, I guess there's nothing holding me here, and I can go off into the wilderness. And so he did. And it took him like 8 years to get across the country to where he found this bridge. It was going across the Columbia River. And he gets as far as the Cayuse tribe in Eastern Oregon, and he's all dressed, by that time, he's dressed in buckskin and everything. And the Indians would have councils. Preacher guy comes with the Cayuse tribe to the council, and they're talking, and he's telling them all about, you guys got to stop the blood feud, because if one of your tribe kills somebody or gets killed, they got to go kill that person, and they got to, you guys got to stop this. And so he tells them that, and they're meeting in a little while. He's out walking around in the woods, and he comes across this camp, and he finds this very beautiful Indian princess. Well, it just so happened that over in China, some warlord was sending his daughter to some other warlord, and they had to get in a ship to go to where this other place is, and the ship gets blown off course and ends up all the way over on the west coast of the United States. Okay, so there ends up to be this Chinese princess with her. She's got a retinue and a bunch of stuff, and she ends up marrying Multnomah when he's a young buck, and they have a daughter. So this preacher guy is walking out in the woods, and he runs across the camp and runs across his daughter, and he falls in love. But then he's sitting there saying, now, wait a minute. If I just, come here and run away with this girl, and I'm telling these people, they aren't gonna listen to me. So he decides, okay, I'm just gonna say my piece about, you guys, you need to stop the blood wars. Well, it ends up that there's been this foreboding, this Indian word is tuamanos, and that the Walame of the Multnomas, those will be the royal tribe until the Bridge of the Gods falls down. One thing the Indian did, they had a potlatch ceremony, and they would show how wealthy they were by giving away everything. So he has his potlatch, and he gives away everything except for this one brocade that his wife had told him never to touch. But he takes this brocade and he wraps it around his wigwam there. And everybody comes in and they're, he's holding court, blah, 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 and giving away stuff. And then the council breaks down. The Cayuse chief leaves with the pretty girl, and they start to disperse. Well, it just so happens that many years ago in China, this brocade had germs in it because this one warlord was trying to send germ warfare to this other thing. So all these Indians come around there and they all start getting sick. And if you look at the Indian legends around Oregon, I mean, the Willamette Valley was called the Valley of Death because most of the Indians had died off by the time the white people had gotten here. And so the Cayuse guy and the pretty girl, they're in a canoe, they're going down the river, mountains blow up, the bridge falls down. Okay, so we need to learn a way so that we all can live together on this beautiful blue ball. And, and it's quite obvious that there's, lots of different people with agendas, okay, from everywhere, just to making money to having power. Okay, but I truly think that we're reaching a point where we're understanding a lot of the BS that is running out there to make us go do this, do that, do that. Then we just run around fighting each other, and we need to stop the blood feuds and learn how to get together. And so I the Fitzgerald story and all of his stories, okay, is giving us, an understanding of the true narrative of our history. And once we understand the perfidy, I think we can rise above it and have a peaceful world.
That's why we focus on the revenge and retribution cycle itself as what has to end.
Yes.
It's exactly it. And this is what we're certainly attempting to do with our communication to King Charles. Alana, hello.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. It's great to be in this conversation. And from what Paul presented and Kris just spoke about, it's really is our heart yearning to move to unity consciousness, the one world family. We are so saddened and sickened by the constant wars. And this is the purpose that we're here to gather together to bring forward, as each doing our small parts in this direction of a world that works for everyone. The letter to King Charles, when Liz proposed that I write it, she had then had a draft proposal to me, and then I came up with another draft that came through me. And I haven't even sent that to Liz because I'm just not satisfied with it enough to show her. But I want you to know that the process is coming along, and I have some thoughts on the process. I was in my local public library Monday, and guess what I got? See this? This is a 600-page book, Jonathan Dimbleby on Prince Charles. It goes up to 1994. And Charles gave him total access to all his papers, his diaries. Jonathan spent many, many, many hours in conversation with Charles. So it was a really amazingly trusting on Charles' part, transparent process. And now I've come online to see that that here we are 30 years later almost, and Dimbleby is still interviewing Charles most recently. And I haven't even seen those yet. So I'm doing like a deep dive into who is this guy, this guy, King Charles. And my friendship and association with Kevin Annett, who uncovered the horror stories of the 50,000 murdered Native American children in the church and state-run residential schools of Canada, and his saga that led him to both being defrocked by the church and to having no justice in the courts, and to disavowing both the church and state of Canada He's the one who did a exorcism at the Vatican a number of years ago. And a few hours later, the sepulchre, the center of the Vatican, what's that called? The dome, was struck by lightning. And it wasn't long thereafter, because then Kevin convened his own international common law court that condemned the actions of the church, of the Catholic Church in Canada, not just Catholic, Protestant churches that ran these schools and the state. They're all implicated. So here again, we weave together Robert's story, Kris's story about the native people, and what Paul has presented in the history of the Fitzgeralds. I think, Paul, what you presented, there's a whole lot packed into there. And of course, you and Liz have been digging deep into this for decades. And it's a lot to take in, your summary of the history, but certainly important. And it might need a few footnotes. When the mention you made of the just war doctrine, I wasn't quite sure what you were saying with that, if that was a good thing or not, Augustine's just war. I consider it quite a corruption of Christianity. When Christianity became the religion of the Roman Empire, it lost its thou shalt not kill ethic. It's lost its pacifism. The Christians were being burned at the stake and thrown to the lions. And then they became so many of them that the Roman government had to do something. So they said, okay, we give up, but then they will be Christianized. But then they held these councils of Nicaea, and they decided what was the true Christianity. And they distorted Christianity, and they distorted it with just war theory that said, why, how, on what condition can a Christian fight and kill in the Roman wars? What is a just war? Well, I don't think that's what Jesus taught. I think he said, thou shalt not kill or turn the other cheek. You do not murder. And that's the 10 Commandments as well. And that is the perennial wisdom teaching. You don't kill other human beings under anything. So I want to weave some threads together. As recent as an article that came out today in the Manila Times. And then I want to make 2 or 3 suggestions as to how we can move forward. There's a kind of exciting new possibility that's emerged, and there's a lot to this. And then there's a suggestion for how others in Paul and Liz's network might give us some input on what they would include if they were to write a letter to King Charles. Because even though we want to really put out the economic justice, we want to look at the land problem and the land problem solutions. A phrase that I often use is how we hold the earth is how we hold each other, or you can reverse that. How we relate to each other is how we relate to the earth. If we exploit each other, we exploit the earth. If we see each other as separate, we see the earth as separate. And it is consciousness now moving from the separative, or what the native, especially the Lakota people call the Wetiko consciousness, into unity consciousness, from separative to unity. It's a big leap. It's a big leap. And the consciousness leap is what we really want to bring forward, because once the consciousness leap and the people who already have glimpses of human unity worldwide, beyond nations, beyond divisions, they are the consciousness people that can move forward the policies that address the land problem, the wealth inequality, the depopulation agenda of the globalists, and so on. So as I thread through Charles, and I see that he does indeed have a very high-minded side. And when Liz and I were talking about how to shape and frame this letter, I just added, from Kevin's work, he sees horrible things that the crown has done, that Elizabeth has done, that Charles has done. I mean, really ugly stuff. That's there too. How conscious they were. Kevin would say conscious. I would say, I don't know. It's sort of an interwoven matrix of nefarious activities. We could trace it back to the beginning of empire with Queen Elizabeth I, but we could thread it throughout human history. This interplay of conquering and the conquered, and the justice and the unity. All of our games, if you think of the game of chess, which came out of India, the game of Go, which is even older, it's a 5,000 years old. It's the first game that they think has ever been played. I was playing it with my little 7-year-old granddaughter the other day, and she won. The game of Monopoly as it became known, not as it was originated, which is a whole other story, because it was originated as a way to share the earth. It was captured and patented and profited now as Monopoly, and the original teachings of sharing the earth, of how you really should play Monopoly from a unity perspective, was lost, but it's coming forward again. People are getting to know the story. But our brain cells have been, for trillions of brain cells have been focused on self and other, on winners and losers, on conquering and the conquered, on the dominators and the enslaved. It's like a big shift to get this whole brain down to our DNA, to start feeling the connectivity of all of us and of the earth and of the cosmos itself. So I wanted to mention, and I want to forward it to Liz and Paul, and they can send it out as they like. This is today in Manila Times. This is Charles Avila, who wrote Ownership, Early Christian Teachings. He covered that early patristic period before it was a Roman Empire, and his book became a classic, Ownership, Early Christian Teachings. And he, in the beginning of his book, and I think in another section, he does say that Henry George is a voice in our most recent times that is sounding the same golden thread of perennial wisdom teachings as the early patristic period. Now, there's a new prime minister of Indonesia, Anwar Ibrahim. And Anwar Ibrahim, Charles knew from back in 1974. And he's a unity consciousness guy. He found out that Anwar Ibrahim, who is now just today in the Philippines as prime minister of Indonesia, revered a Filipino guy from numbers of years ago, who none of us probably have heard of. I had, Jose Portacio Rizal. And Rizal was a unity consciousness leader. Charles says about Anwar that he's a leader without ambition and a revolutionary without hatred. A leader without ambition. That he'd rather be an artist or a literature person, but he's called to politics as a duty of service. And he says that in Rizal, this Filipino leader, wrote the first Southeast Asian novel, and said, get this, this really struck me. In the history of human suffering is a cancer so malignant that the least touch awakens such agonizing pain. I want to read it again. In the history of human suffering is a cancer so malignant that the least touch awakens such agonizing pain. And they're saying that it takes tremendous courage and self-effacement to look inside oneself, to find the core of suffering and the core of the evil. So this is all in Manila Times today. We must win freedom by deserving it, by improving the mind and enhancing the dignity of the individual, loving what is just, good, and great, to the point of dying for it. He was later assassinated. When a people reach these heights, the idols and the tyrants fall like a house of cards, and freedom shines in the first dawn. So it goes on, but it's really important about liberating the mind and the soul and the spirit. But because both Charles Avila and the new prime minister were looking at the fate of these nearly landless and landless poor farmers in Indonesia and in the Philippines. And that's what led Charles to these teachings on land, and to understand Henry George was part of this wisdom teaching. And he's saying that the Abrahamic faiths, if you reinvigorate religion, it has the danger, when compounded with elements of political and social discontent, to cause us to express ourselves through violence and bloodshed. But if molded under the hand of universal wisdom, this is religion, the power of religion, it could be a force to free us from ignorance and intolerance, injustice, and greed. In other words, a peaceful world that works for everyone. Charles is in New York. We've been working together for some years. He is a loving being who has almost been assassinated himself. He had to go underground under Marcos at risk of being assassinated. He was on the tarmac when Aquino, who was standing against Marcos years back, Aquino was trying to get elected, and on the tarmac at the airport when Aquino had landed into the Philippines after being out of the country, he was assassinated, murdered right beside Charles. Charles was standing right beside him. Charles was mayor of a major city. So he's a beautiful, humble, loving force in the world. So I want to send that out. Now, another thing that has come forward is that their original Earth Day was founded by John McConnell, and it was through a proclamation of San Francisco as the city of St. Francis and his peace. So the city government of San Francisco passed the proclamation for Earth Day, and it was to be on the equinox, the spring equinox, which meant balance and harmony worldwide. It had all that symbolism. Talking with Liz, she said, oh, that's the Afghani New Year, and it is Nowruz. And researching that connection a little further today, that must be the connection with the Baha'i faith, because that is the Baha'i holy day and New Year. And the Baha'i are universal, one human family, peace and harmony movement. So this Earth Day celebration on the 20th of March, I just found out a few hours ago, they finally got a sponsor to have where they usually have this event, which is in the Rose Garden at the United Nations. So it will be at 5:30 on March 20th, if that's the Monday, yes, March 20th. And they'll be able to use the beautiful Rose Garden at the UN where there is the Peace Bell. So I'm in touch with one of the founders of that. And Mary Carlin is in touch with the organizers still. So we're in a conversation. I've asked to be on the program to present the letter to Charles, because another connection with this letter to Charles, which is going to look at the land problem and how to solve it through the commons rents, land value tax, economic justice policies. The other connection there is that John McConnell, the founder of the original Earth Day, had also said that 2% of the commons rent of the Earth's resources should go to pay for peacekeeping, global peacekeeping, and environmental restoration. Is there any wonder that the powers that should not be changed Earth Day to April 22nd? It's a nicer weather day for people in the North, the global North. But the academics and those of separative mind took the original Earth Day, just nullified it. This UN celebration is about the only place that kept it alive and made it April 22nd. Not convenient to the global South, but convenient to the North as a spring day. And then they shaped it to their, and made it a rather light rather than a deep justice day. So we're proposing that we bring the letter to and announce it, that this is the initiation of the letter. March 20th, the equinox. There's all these layers of meaning now, the Afghan layer, the Baha'i layer, and then the other thing I want, I already mentioned, if we could ask people to get back to Liz and myself about suggestions for the letter, as I keep working on it, feeding drafts in with Liz, and we keep refining it. And we do then have a very solid deadline for March 20th to have it completed, so we can put it out in the world, which will give us quite a few weeks before May 6th, which is the coronation. Yes. So that is a good solid place in the interregnum period that's so important, as Liz and Paul have described it to me. So that's what I brought for today.
Well, I want to add something on to what you had to say there. Edgar Casey also talks about the spring solstice, March 19th/20th, as being Christ's actual real birth date for all.
Really?
Yes.
I know Edgar Casey, but I didn't know that. Really?
Yes. Yes. And you know, it's very interesting. I'm doing some work on a book. Well, I'm always doing work on a book. I'm doing work on several books, but one book I'm doing work on right now is called Cannabis, the Ancient Sacrament of the Near East. And it's, most of it is about the Bible, and shows how what we got out of the Bible a lot is a reason for the priest to be, and let's just say that Moses didn't really write the first 5 books of the Bible. They kind of came out after the Babylonian exile, and they really did create a method of control. Okay, and Christ came along and said a couple other things, and then there was, as she was talking, there was a period before the Council of Nicene where you had lots of different shoots of Christianity and lots of different thoughts about it. The tent of the meeting, they're creating this little meeting, and then they're putting incense in there and creating smoke, and then sitting in the smoke for a while, and then coming out and prophesizing and saying different things. And if you look at it very, very hard, there were entheogens, quote unquote, drugs that were involved in, shamanistic rituals that really, helped develop into a lot of the quote unquote religions that we have today. And, when you look at the religions, you look at Buddha, you look at the Hindu, you look at the Mohammedanism, they all basically boil down to the golden rule. There is a way to walk down here, and like I say, with the internet and with the personal computer, the ability for us to understand our situation is just, there's just so much more information that's available to create an understanding. That's what it takes, an understanding of the perfidy, so that we can rise above it. And I really see that happening. So I'm just very hopeful for the future.
Well, I'm hopeful, that we can formulate the communication that can really help to, break through this, the confusion that people have as to where to put that positive energy. Because I think this is so positive. This has so much potential because it's so solid. There's an awful lot of events around the world that pray for peace, that om for peace, that make sounds for peace. We are actually talking about the economy of peace. We're talking about creating something and making it real, actually helping people understand how to take the metaphor of peace and turn it into the platform of life.
And this is aligned, as Kris, the golden rule is in all faiths and all peoples of morality. And the golden thread of perennial wisdom teachings on economic justice is there as well.
Yes.
Back to the Vedic period thousands of years ago. We know there was actually land value tax.
I hope everyone can, consider how to help get this word out in whatever way, in whatever special channels that you might have. Okay, we want this, think of it as when it's put together, it would be kind of like a press kit. That's my best term for it. It has enough basic information in the opening to let someone know what's inside. Okay, it's a kind of overall introduction that would have to be set up. The letter is the introduction to the whole information pack that would be behind it.
Oh, yeah.
Ruth, I see your little yellow hand there. What have you? Yes.
First of all, it's very exciting that this is coming on. It's very practical. I wanted to just ask, I want to first ask a question, and that is that I've been receiving a lot of information about the Great Reset and, the bank digital currency. And I feel like this is such a profound threat to freedom in the world. And there's something about what you are doing, which is a counterbalance to this threat from the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum, that is a global reset that they want to do. And I just wondered about if you want to bring in some of the fact that this is an alternative vision, global vision that really is so human and so full of freedom and is not a restrictive, over controlling, limiting system. I just want to say that. So
this is why, Ruth, it's this personage of this Charles guy, because he's right there with the World Economic Forum and all the globalist elites.
I heard him.
Right? He's right there. And yet he has a great love and appreciation of nature. Has shown concern for inner city impoverished people. And this is the other potential and promise of what we're doing here with the letter is to bring forth how it will shift to the high-minded side of this personage of Charles, rather than going the way of these controller dominators. It's breaking out of that domination system into the unity way. And it also involves strong empowerment of individuals and our local communities, our local governments. It's got to be decentralized, minimal global governance. And there are great seers like Ralph Bersodi who also spoke to how to have that kind of governance, decentralized yet minimum on the global. So the visions and it's pretty clear about how to do it. How much we'll include it in the letter or in the supplemental package that we're due, I don't know. But that's why, Ruth, it is such a pivotal moment. You know,
Alana, would you name again slowly so I could write it, that resource for the minimal global governance?
Yes, Ralph Bersodi and his Decentralist Manifesto. And
Thank
he was
you.
a Georgist. And he was with Gandhi in India for a while. And he was a founder of one of the original community land trusts, the School of Living. And he wrote Flight from the City, which is how to get back to an earth-based way of living and out of the high-tech, how to have food sovereignty and all the good things that people want today, you know, more empowerment with the humans and the earth. Yeah, Bersodi's even more buried than Henry George.
I wanted to make a quick statement, Ruth, to address what you just suggested. You know, my idea is to really try and use King Charles as the alternative to all the other. I think part of it is because of the role he plays. It's a very different role. He actually technically is not supposed to get into anything political directly. All right. We know that obviously behind the scenes, he probably has all kinds of direct involvement, but I think he really represents, for me, the embodiment of their alternative. And what we're trying to do is bring him to our side.
Yes.
We're trying to get him over, and then he has to pull on them.
Right.
Okay?
I feel like this is a race, honestly.
Yeah.
I feel like the horses are neck and neck.
Yeah, it does feel that way.
Well, that's the core, but that's why the significance of coronation, because if we can get these ideas into the ether, Charles will be affected by them, which means his coronation will be different. Whatever his thoughts are going into that coronation will be affected by what we're doing. That's our job, okay? And as I said about, whether we can get a direct statement from him or not is not completely the issue, even though it would be fantastic, obviously, if we really could. But it is not the real issue. It is getting it into the discussion. But we're not bringing in anti-anything. It's just not necessary, okay? Because once we get the peace and the pro-peace active, a lot of the negative things that are out there are going to just melt away because they're rooted in the war economy and the weaponizing right now of even everybody's thinking.
It's not something that we have to do by ourselves. There's a cosmic frequency happening. And one of the most wonderful indications of that is that the Wall Street Journal published an article about the history of the game of Monopoly, originally created and patented by an amazing woman early on in the last.
Elizabeth McGee.
I was completely bowled over that. Why is the Wall Street Journal saying anything about this? They actually say that McGee was a Georgist. What's that? And they give a brief description of what that was about, because it was about economic justice, essentially, because Henry George was one of the most well-acknowledged inspirations for the progressive era. When people find out what they've done, they will be really unhappy with those power elites.
Yeah.
And they're running dogs, as they say.
Quick add-on, the Wall Street Journal, as Alana, you sent it, just had an article last week about Detroit basically signing on with Georgist economics to basically turn things around. And in the article, they mentioned specifically that history, which shocked me.
Was that within the last month or so, Wendell?
I was not looking at the date. The fact that it would happen in this century,
Uh,
I'm concerned.
The
Pretty
21st
good.
A
century.
miracle, absolute miracle, which means to me that the power elites, they get it. They do get it.
Many,
And-
many of these people aren't evil, okay?
They're not.
And you know, they don't have a playbook. They're just working off of, you know, what this person did and other things. And I wanted to bring up here, this is, it's a book called Healing Earth More by Wolfgang Paul. And it is what I consider one of my grimoires, okay? And basically, it tells the story of this valley in Austria, northern Austria, it's southern Germany, where the last time the ice age came through, the glaciers, when they were retreating, they took the topsoil and turned it on top of itself. Okay, so you have this peat, you have this moor that hasn't been dry for over 10,000 years. Okay, and they go into this and they find full on herbs. Okay, and some of these herbs have been are extinct. Okay, and this mud, you can take anthrax and put anthrax into a thing of this mud, and it turns the anthrax into not a beneficial, but it doesn't matter there. Okay, it takes other microbes and different things. I mean, it has natural estrogens in it. It has natural all kinds of stuff in it, and it turns them either into a beneficial source or that it doesn't make any difference. Okay?
Neutralizes it.
One thing I'd like Alana to talk a little bit about the UN. Okay, there's a lot of people out there that want us to be locked into battle mode. Okay, and if somebody says UN, well, they're a bad organization, I'm not supposed to like them, blah, 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 blah. And we need to be careful about that. And again, most of the people are not on the agenda because they're evil. If they're on an agenda, it might be because that's what their daddy did, or because they're making money or something. But we can all be turned. They can all be turned. And just like Liz said, we want to get Charles on our side. And I think that is possible. And again, this mud takes stuff and either turns it into something that helps them or it neutralizes them. I mean, the UN is, you know, it's not a bunch of evil people trying to dominate the world and create a global government.
What good it might do.
It's a way for people to interact.
Well, you know, I think that, you know, like any organization, it's not monolithic and not everybody's on the same page about everything. There certainly are layers and differences. So I think that's always the case. And we have to genuinely be open to, I think, you know, sort of accepting the possibility that we can communicate. I think we can get some very powerful things across.
Zan, I just noticed you unmuted. Is that an indication of a desire to ask or say something?
Well, I have a question. I would put this more as a question, but it strikes me that you're writing this letter as Americans to a British monarch. And I'm questioning whether one possible useful strategy would be to point to several facts, for example, that the great admiration of the United Kingdom for abolishing slavery more than 50 years before the United States abolished slavery. Looking at military budgets and the fact that, you know, we point at China as being so evil, and yet, I mean, even just a basic Wikipedia article on this that just lists military budgets. You know, China's, we probably need to check it and update it further, but China's military budget is less than half the US military budget. And of course, Russia's military budget is less than 10%, I believe. And Britain's is in that, you know, if you split 100%, just a couple of percent of the 100%. And so that's another reason to admire the United Kingdom and to suggest that he's in a wonderful place to lead some kind of messaging that could be very influential on the United States. I don't know.
As a student of marketing and sales, and I really appreciate your perspective on
Exactly.
how
Well,
to
I'm
win
not a
that,
student of marketing.
monarch over.
Well,
I'm very struck by the unity consciousness that Alana reviewed, and for newcomers who are listening live on Facebook or those who see this on the YouTube playback, I highly encourage you to go to YouTube, find the channel called Valediction Vision, and watch Roundtable 16, where Alana does a great teaching on the economics of justice, the perennial wisdom of these kinds of things as background to today's conversation, and the implication of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is that we are one and the same, that there's something of an allusion to this, you're you and I'm me. By definition, the golden rule implies I do to myself what I do to you. And therein might be the definition of unity consciousness. And therein also is the door opening to a spiritual imagination, which then shines a whole new light on Paul and Liz's books, especially the two valedictions, and just the mind-blowing opportunity if some of that is true. And none of that has to be true. If you just do a gut check, live a few days as if that's true, and you might find yourself lighthearted and refreshed in a way. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. Living as if it is brings you back to life with childhood zeal. Hi, Ruth.
I feel like this is such an important thing, the spirituality, and what Alana was saying about, you can only relate to the earth as you relate to yourself. You can only relate to another person as you relate to yourself. And I feel like people that understand how to control other people have really understood how to fragment people from their bodies, from their sexuality, from their own self-worth. And we're in an epidemic. The real epidemic we have right now is that people's attention is being stolen from them. And there is a way in which they are being taught that they are not enough, and something outside of them that they must consume and must buy is going to make them whole. It's a virus that allows people to be very manipulated by fear. And I feel as though one of the biggest fears that people have is who they really are, and the entry into their soma, into their mind. Because I really believe at the end, at the bottom of the well is emptiness. And the emptiness is actually the womb space. And we're all miraculous beings that are happening in the moment as a miracle that is unfolding. And we are so full of mental noise that we forget that. And so we cannot actually be in a right relationship with the present moment and seeing the miracle of ourselves, of other people, of the earth, of everything that's happening around us. In fact, this fear is causing us to try to consume what is outside of us to recognize ourselves.
Ruth, do you know Richard Grannon, author and kind of coach, success coach, mental health coach? But if you go to YouTube, he's got a brand new one called Form versus Formlessness. What you just said sounds like you just watched it. So you might really resonate.
For 10 years, 20 years, I wrote a book about it.
Well, also what you described is how this guy, Richard Grannon, describes the effect of narcissistic abuse. He really coaches people to overcome that. And he's talking as a sufferer, as someone who's a self-confessed codependent, who attaches themselves to abusive people in order to fill themselves up with something, because the codependent doesn't exist on their own. And he really well describes, almost verbatim as you did, the commoditization and filling ourselves with content because of a panic of, being addicted actually to it.
Yeah, I just want to say that this is getting to the root, this kind of self-investigation, which has to go on in order for us to actually actualize this unity consciousness on the planet. We have to go and actually really rewire, pull the threads out of all this programming that is, it's like some of it's ancestral, some of it's right here, and it's all ancestral and it lands in us.
Alana, did you hear Chris's question about your thoughts about the UN and its potential for good?
I've been a non-governmental representative for consultative for ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council, since 2003, and for Department of Public Information since 1993. So I've been to a lot of UN conferences, a lot of things, both in the UN building in New York and in other countries. The UN is a reflection of our human collective consciousness. Its intention, which is why they have non-governmental organizations formally affiliated, is for we the people of the world to create a world of peace. It's coming out of the wars, World War II. I mean, and it is the place where people from the world can come around a table and talk, at least, even though it can be contentious. The Security Council is established by the winning powers from World War II. It doesn't work very well, but there is a General Assembly of all UN nation states. Wonderful documents come out of the UN that are put together by meticulous consensus. It's quite a process, every word in those documents, and they're high-minded, but they're not enforceable. People get afraid the UN trying to be a world government. It's not at all. It's dysfunctional as a world government. But like anything that's making a stir in the world, the Wetiko, separative consciousness, the World Economic Forum types, the globalizers, the power elite, they take everything and they twist it for their own power purposes. Whether it's the UN's Agenda 2030, which is a beautiful document if you read it, but now it's considered by so many people to be a really, really bad, terrible things, but they haven't read it. The main thing that came out of the 5 big global conferences of the 90s, important conferences, the Women's Conference in Beijing was 50,000 women, the biggest gathering ever on Earth. I went to a smaller one, was at Istanbul of the UN Habitat. It was only about 20,000 people. So these global conferences and all the good ideas and documents they generated, you know what they said? How do we finance this? All this good stuff we've dreamed up with as a world. How do we finance it? How do we pay for it? Hence the conversation on financing for development, and hence the power struggle. How the heck do you finance the good stuff that humanity wants? And that's where it's at right now. Either we have some kind of income tax on the backs of the people, which is counter to helping have a good world, and the elites will still rule, which is what the elites would like with all their tax shelters, which are islands owned by the crown. They're the continuation of the British colonial empire has become a financial empire. So the dynamic is around this whole question of taxation. That's really what it comes down to. We're either going to share the commons through the commons rent, or they're going to keep grabbing the commons, all of it, all the land, all the resources, everything. You shall have nothing and be happy, because they're going to give us a bunch of soma and artificial intelligence in our brains to control us. We're either going to have that, or we're going to have a sharing of the planet and its resosurces.
I'm for sharing of the planet.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Let's take a vote.
Yes.
Right, well, I wanted, one point I wanted to give one summary point about a lot of the things that have been said here really has to do with the fact that there still is a world out there of problems in communication. And that's why our idea, I think, about the real basis on which a lot of the problems are coming from is based on inherited revenge and retribution.
Yeah.
That you are born into it. And if you don't go along with it, you basically can get kicked out of the family or out of whatever that, whatever it is, the tribe or the community, whatever it is. And we know that this is the heart of a lot of the suffering, that people who want to do something or change don't know how to. So that's one of the reasons that's what Paul's whole point is about, realizing about what revenge and retribution ultimately will lead to is self-annihilation. And once you get that across to anybody who's in that situation, who really is questioning it, they're going to go right inside their source and start telling everybody inside there. Do you realize where this is going? See, what we need to energize the ones who are struggling, okay, and trying to make a difference with the kind of information that, really can get through. And I really think that that's why I made such a point of showing you the statement that Paul said in this documentary, that ended up bracketing the documentary because it gave the director a very significant statement in addressing the heart of her own struggle. She was an Iranian whose father had been killed during the Iranian Revolution. She came here and ended up feeling as if the war came here after 9/11 and was suffering with that. And this documentary was an expression of that.
Paul, the piece that you read,
Mhm.
did you compose that for this roundtable?
Yes, I did. Mostly, it was, kind of an accumulation of things over the years that I put together. And, there's a lot of background on and the reason why we wanted to get the valediction out, and we're so thankful that Kris, decided that he wanted to publish it, was the fact that we thought people would be helped if they understood our thought process and the experiences that we had personally, that we didn't connect to anything when we started out doing. But as we put it together and it began to assemble itself through coincidence and synchronicity, we began to see that there was a larger picture here, a kind of, a deeper understanding of the world we were living in. And, most people just don't look at that. The exoteric, they look at the exoteric, what's happening to them, not the esoteric aspects and where these ideas are coming from and how spiritually you're connected to it, and spiritually your family's connected to it, and how we're all connected to each other. And that is what we wanted to try to convey, like on a step-by-step basis. Read the book and see how we walked through this experience and talked it out. We had these experiences with all these amazing people over the years, from John Kenneth Galbraith to Ted Kennedy, to all these different people, and just saying, wait a minute, how did I find myself in the middle of this situation? And so, it was people who've read it have told us, this reads like a movie. Well, Oliver Stone was part of that experience as well. And so that knocked us into another way of trying to see the world and explain it. What do you do? I remember going through, sitting in the Capitol Hotel, watching the explosions go off over the mountains and thinking to myself, how am I ever going to tell this as a movie script? It is a movie, but what is that? It's almost like a dream. And so what we have to do is we have to become conscious in our own dream and start to make it work. Books are a wonderful way of getting to that step.
Once you start defining everyone as an enemy, you don't stop until you look in the mirror and define yourself as that enemy. And then there's only one choice that you have when you've done that, and that's self-annihilation.
As I look back on the last 3 years.
Paul, do you have any intention to publish the piece that you read?
It's already posted on our website. It's the first one, on the left-hand side, we have articles. So it's now the first one.
On valediction.net?
Yeah.
What's the title of the article, please?
From the Jerusalem
From
Crusade
Crusade to the Holy Grail to the death of JFK.
onwards.
Onward.